Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Online Job Searching 101, offered by the Oregon State University Alumni Association in partnership with Oregon State's Professional and Continuing Education Unit. I'm Greg Aronoff, the Marketing and Communications Manager here with Professional and Continuing Ed. And I'm joined by Yulia Dennis from the Alumni Association, and we have a wonderful panel of experts. Welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Greg.
And before we get started, I'm going to share the agenda for the day. I work for Professional and Continuing Ed, which is the non-credit arm of the university, and we partner with colleges across campus to offer open enrollment classes to the public on subjects ranging from workforce training to wood science. And we're always excited to continue our partnership with Yulia Dennis from the Alumni Association. And I'm sure some of you have joined us for some of our other webinars on their career series. So we're excited to have Yulia and her panel here today to talk about the essentials of job searching online. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Yulia.
Thank you, Greg. And it's always great to partner with you on the webinar series. And this series is special this year because we've partnered with our early engagement unit, and we're offering these as part of our preparing our students and our recent grads for the postgraduate plans. And I'm really thankful that the presenters are here to share their knowledge and expertise with all of the attendees. And thank you for everyone who's attending here today. Brief introduction of myself. My name is Yulia Dennis, and I'm the director for our Alumni Career Services program. We're very fortunate at OSU to have the Alumni Career Services programs. And if you have anything that you need help with as far as your career goes, please reach out to me, and I'd be always happy to help you. Just a reminder that please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. Questions will be addressed throughout the webinar, and a link to the presentation will be emailed to you afterwards. I want to provide a very brief overview of the webinar today. We're going to be looking at tools and methods for searching for online job searching, and we'll also be discussing strategies for increasing your network. We know that networking and making connections is a very important part of job searching, and we're going to understand tools and different things that you can use to help you with your job search. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to introduce himself. And I also want to say that our 4 panelists are all very amazing. They're all alumni career ambassadors. I'm very thankful to work with each and every one of them. And I'm going to have Bruce introduce himself now.
My name is Bruce Townsey. I am the recruitment manager for a company called Scylla, which is a fintech in Portland. I also have run my own recruiting agency called Talent Driven Consulting.
Wonderful, thank you. And you've been doing many webinars for us before LinkedIn and other topics as well. So thank you so much for being here. And next we have Marcia.
Always happy to help.
Thank you. Now, next we have Marcia, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi, Yulia. I just wanted to mention the slides are not advancing for everybody. I'm not sure if it's just us.
Yeah, it's not for me either.
However, this is Marcia Torres Ruiz, a 2001 grad from OSU. I'm currently working at Blend International as a global talent program manager. However, I also have my consulting business on the side called Imagen, where I help folks with developing their personal brands through everything from resume building, coaching and development to personal style as well.
Thank you, Marcia. And can you see my screen now?
Hi, Yulia. This is Charisse. I'll introduce myself. We do now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone.
So I'm Charisse Bunn, and I am a 2015 grad of the College Student Services Administration Master's Program at Oregon State University. And I am the Assistant Director of International Student Engagement here at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm a manager within our office, and I'm working on a lot of innovative projects along with general student engagement.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Therese. And now just want to confirm everyone can see my slides. Is that correct, Therese?
That's correct.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. And then next, we're going to have Macklin introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Macklin Turnquist. I graduated from Oregon State back in 2018, so I'm a more recent grad. My chemical engineering degree. Currently, I'm an automation and validation engineer at a company called JSAT Automation. They're a consulting company. They focus mainly in the biotech fields, and we focus on automating processes for biotech and other companies and other industries. And also, you can find my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Macklin. And I'm, again, just want to express my gratitude for all the panelists. And Macklin's one of our most recent alumni career ambassadors, and I'm excited that he's here as well. Next, we're going to do a quick poll. So go ahead and answer the question. I'm going to go ahead and launch it right now. And then we'll have Greg read off the responses. And the poll question is, what's your current employment status?
All right, thank you, Yulia. Yep, as we look at the responses come in fast and furious, the top two look like they are neck and neck. So not employed and looking for a new job or temp furloughed, evenly tied with employed but looking for a new position. And then it drops off drastically after that.
I'm definitely not surprised by the results, and this very much helps us as we're thinking about this presentation. We know that a lot of people right now are having a challenging time in their career, which is why this topic and our services are more important than ever. And definitely those of you who are looking, actively looking, or who are not employed, you can reach out to us after the webinar as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcia, who's going to talk to us about fundamentals of searching online. And Marcia is perfect for this because she has a background in HR and can share her expertise on this topic.
Thanks, Yulia. So a couple things to consider when you do start your online search is sometimes it can be a little overwhelming as to where to search and which companies to look for. But I want to give you a couple of quick tips, and I know the rest of the panel will also give you some tips from their perspectives. But for one of the things I always recommend to folks is look at where you're looking for roles. So if you have a specific business in mind, it's important to go to those websites directly. I always look at things that I enjoy doing or products that I use as sort of the starting point for when I'm searching for a job or recommending others to search for jobs as well. Companies will always be listing the most current positions there, which when you go to a career builder for example, sometimes they just scrape the website so they're not the most up to date. So you want to go directly to the company site as well, and you can see which roles are actually active and which ones are not. And sometimes companies can choose not to post things in certain job boards. So I would always recommend to go there first. I'm a huge proponent of LinkedIn. I know I've had some personal success when searching for new roles through LinkedIn. So I would highly recommend that if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, that you go there and then look through the jobs that are available through the job tab on LinkedIn. Great resource, great place to look. You can read quickly about the company as well and see what other roles that they may have open that maybe you hadn't considered or seen. The other part is if you do have a LinkedIn profile, it's extremely important to make sure it's up to date. Highly recommend that your profile picture is up to date and professional looking, that you've got your information on there for recruiters to contact you. And one consideration that you may want to consider is that more than 90% of the recruiters use LinkedIn as their primary search tool. So you want to be on there and taking a look. You can also go to, if you have a profession where it's very niche, you might want to go to some professional networks and organizations and societies. They may have additional job boards as well. And the other piece from all that is make sure you set up job alerts. The job alerts will help continue to provide you some additional jobs that are available in your area. Moving on to personal branding, one of my favorite things. First off, you want to really evaluate your values, interests, and goals, and make sure that that aligns with the companies that you're searching for as well. It really shows you a little bit about who you are and how relevant it becomes to your career. For job seekers, it's significant to make sure that your personal brand determines how you're representing yourself. It comes through in your interviews, so understand who you are. And understand what things you're willing to bend on, what things you aren't willing to bend on. I already talked a little bit about updating your online profile, but make sure your resume is updated. I generally, as a rule of thumb, I will go in and personally update my own resume every 6 months, because at times I might forget some large project or important initiative that I just completed that could potentially be resume worthy. And then I can always revise it as I go along. Lastly, building a network. So again, reach out to previous coworkers, supervisors, have them provide you recommendations online on LinkedIn. They have a great platform to do this. You can become more active by posting materials, and so you start getting more followers. And so you want to reach out to those networks when you start to build those. Use the alumni network. I know when I was moving to Oregon, after being on the East Coast for almost 20 years, the alumni network was a great venue for me to really reconnect with what's going on here in Oregon.
That's great. Thank you so much, Marcia. Yeah. So a couple points here. One is that next week, as part of our Winning in Life series, we have our LinkedIn webinar, and that's going to really hit up on a lot of these things regarding LinkedIn. And so do be sure to tune into that if you're looking to really buffer up your LinkedIn profile. And then really good point about the resume and 6-month thing. I think that's a really good practice. And Greg, do we have any questions right now that would apply to this topic?
We do, yeah. I think this is a good one. And I'll just read the question in full. So it's, while we are always tailoring our resumes for specific jobs, our online profiles on sites like LinkedIn tend to say the same. So what's the best way to write a profile so you're not writing yourself out of a great opportunity?
That's a great question. Marcia, are you able to give us some insights into that?
Absolutely. So there's always the option to update your header. So you can, if you're actively searching, if you are currently not employed, because you don't want to do this if you are employed, but actively seeking a role, I would put in there my header. I'd say, actively seeking roles in XYZ, or you can make your header be a little bit more of a quick bullet of who you are. So, innovative, a leader, strategic, other key items that might be relating to your role that you're looking for. And yes, your resume should be tailored to the roles that you are applying for, especially if you're including an objective in there. And you do want to tailor some of the accomplishments that perhaps you've had in your career. So you want to include that in your resume. In LinkedIn, it's going to be a little bit more general. And I always say, put in the highlights. I think once people realize the highlights are in there, recruiters will then go out and reach out to see if it's a good match.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Next, we have some more additional advice from Marcia on applying.
Yeah, so one of my personal mantras is never, never give up, and it's something I've always kind of strived for. And personally, I've had folks tell me, you got to apply if 100% of the job requirements match your skills. That's actually not necessarily the truth. Absolutely, if you don't meet 100% of the requirements, apply. You want to make sure you have the soft skills and the track record to show that you could do the job. And check off all the items on the list, but you don't have to have a check mark for every item on that list of requirements that is on a job posting. And it does seem pretty logical to go for jobs that you're qualified for or fully qualified for, but you're limiting yourself, and it's really not, and you're limiting your mindset as to what you could be looking for. And you might cut yourself off from potentially finding some amazing opportunities. So absolutely, try to look at it and say, if you meet 60% or 70% of the requirements on there, give it a shot. The worst case that can happen is that you won't be considered, but you may not realize that, sometimes they put there's a there without the intention of having somebody fulfill each one of those requirements. I've given advice to not just, yeah.
I was going to jump in on that. One of the things about the question that was asked, and when you're applying online, a lot of times it'll be using a keyword search to identify good potentials within the list of candidates. And so you want to make sure that the resume you're submitting online has a healthy keyword index or listing, so that the types of roles, responsibilities, skills that you have get noticed in that. Because sometimes a job description is written and there's peripheral things that would be of interest, and if some of those catch the interest of the recruiter, you may get called regardless of how closely you match the full profile.
Yes,
Absolutely.
very good advice.
Yeah, and also, I know one of these is one of my passion items but from a diversity and inclusion perspective, it's actually quite interesting when we look at the application statistics. There's been several studies that have been done that show that women tend to not apply to jobs that they do not 100% qualify for, whereas men who do apply for jobs typically will apply to jobs that they meet maybe 60% of the qualifications. And from a gender perspective, when they're searching for jobs, it's pretty equal in terms of how many jobs they're searching for. It's just the application rate that actually drops down. So, as a woman, it's sort of refreshing to me to think that, we've been putting this pressure on ourselves to meet 100% of the requirements, but in reality, you don't need to. So, kind of get out of your comfort zone and try to reach out and find roles that maybe you might meet 60% of those qualifications, and apply. Like I said, the worst thing that can happen is that you're not considered for the role, but you might surprise yourself and actually be considered for a role that you didn't expect to.
I love that advice. And I always tell people, don't be the one to say no to yourself. Let other people say no and you reach out for it anyway. So I love that. And Greg, do we have another question that could apply to this slide as well, or just in general is a good question?
We do, yeah. For all the questions, we had a lot of a great one submitted, and a lot of them were about how to have your resume stand out. So that's part one, and then part two is how do you stand out in a field of applicants with more experience?
Great questions. And Marcia, I'll have you answer, and then Bruce, I'll have you answer after that as well.
Sure. So in terms of standing out, and even from a resume perspective, the question about the resume, for a resume to stand out, one of the things from a recruiter's perspective is the ease of my ability to read it. So there's this misconception that artificial intelligence, or AI, is being used to sort through resumes at every company. And that's actually not true. I've worked for some rather large companies where you have a recruiter that is actually reading every single one of the resumes submitted, or applications submitted. So the cleaner and the simpler your resume is, and quick ability to quickly read through it, the better, right? So I would say avoid having long paragraphs of what you've done. Bullets are great. Not having to repeat your what you did from a job or a role, and telling us your duties, but tell us what you accomplished from your duties. So what makes you stand out is, how did you save X% for the company, or how did you improve X% of efficiency for for that new product? Or, how did you increase the sales, or how much did you increase the sales by every quarter? It could be anything like that, but a lot of those things definitely help you stand out when it's not just a reiteration of job duties, but actually what you did to make those job duties stand out.
Great, thank you. Bruce, how about your perspective on the question?
I would echo what Marcia just said about actionables. So if your resume speaks to what you've accomplished and done in the role more than what your role was specifically, it tends to carry a lot more weight. Another thing that I've seen done well on a number of recent resumes is some sort of a graphic that indicates maybe your level of skill in a certain area. So I'm thinking specifically right now of a computer programming resume, and they had probably a dozen or so different languages listed, and then a bar chart kind of going from, intermediate to, proficient to expert. And they had different lengths of bars for the different languages to illustrate their level of knowledge of those different entities. And so real quickly, I could visually look and say, okay, here's the three I care the most about, and here's how this person relates. And that, again, it helps the recruiter process the information.
Great, thank you both so much for responding to that. We're gonna do one more poll question. And this one is, let me pull it up really quick, is on LinkedIn. So do you have a LinkedIn profile, and how active are you? And we'll have Greg read off the responses.
Okay, as the responses come in, it looks like the majority are yes, but use every few months or less. And right now, with the majority voted, it looks like that is exactly tied with yes and use weekly.
Great, thank you. Definitely, the more often you use it, I think the better, especially in today's job search, which leads us to the next topic, which is going to be done by Macklin. And Macklin's going to share about connecting with people.
Yeah, thanks, Elia. So what I would say first off is if you take nothing, the only thing you take from today, from what I'm going to talk about, is networking is absolutely crucial. It's extremely vital. And I mean, if you don't believe me, that's how I've gotten every single job that I've gotten, and that's how I got my job from a month ago, despite in the middle of this tough time with the coronavirus. So definitely networking is extremely important, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'll touch on later. I just wanted to have that as my big bold first slide thing. And in order to do networking, I know right now it's really hard because you're like, well, how do I network with the current environment is staying at home, right? So it's like impossible to network. Well, there's other ways you can network, and like one of them is we already touched on is having a solid LinkedIn profile and using LinkedIn. And I was in a way glad to see that people weren't using it as much, because now I'll tell you guys you should be using that profile pretty much every day. And I don't necessarily mean updating your LinkedIn profile every day. That's kind of unrealistic, but using it every day, looking on your news feed, reaching out to people and connecting with people, searching for connections is a great way to network, and probably the best bet right now for networking that we have in this current situation. So I think if we could go to the next slide, I was going to talk more about that.
Go for it, Macklin.
Yeah, so, okay, so the best way to make connections is basically what I would say is ask people to get coffee and beers back when, the coronavirus has kind of died down. But at the meantime, what you can do is request connections on LinkedIn with people, and even people that you don't have any, mutual friends with, or that you even know. Like, I encourage to reach out to people that you've never met and don't know them, to try to connect with them. You can sometimes create like a little message to them when you connect with them. That way they're just not just wondering who's this random stranger they're connecting with. And tips with that is I would say find people with a similar background to you or in a career you find interesting. That can make it a lot easier for them to feel comfortable with networking with you. Like if you're both from OSU grads, or you're both in the same major, or if this is a career path that you see that they're in that you are like, oh yeah, this is something I would want to pursue. So I would say first do that, then reach out, and once you connect with them, ask them, message them online and ask if they would take the time to talk about their career and any advice they have for you. I would message people all the time and every day and say, hey, I'm a new engineer, fresh out of college. I'd like to talk to you. I noticed your profile looks very interesting. I'd like to get some career advice from you and any advice you have for me. And you'll find at first, it might be a little tricky, but you'll get good at it really quickly, because I often find that people like to talk about themselves, their experiences. So it's a lot easier than you think, reaching out to people, and you find the conversation starts to flow if you just start asking them questions. So I'd say like once the conversation ends, if it goes well, if you feel like it goes well, like let's say it lasted longer than 5 minutes, then feel free to ask them to stay in touch. You already connected on LinkedIn, but maybe get their contact info. Ask if they would like to see your resume and send it to them. Ask if there's jobs available at their company if you're interested in that after talking with them. Now, I'd say it's also really important to follow up about once a month or so, maybe a little bit less. It just depends on how you feel, what is professional. You don't want to annoy them. That's the last thing you want to do after you built that connection up. And I think it also helps in the long run to increase your professional network. You'll never know when you use that connection in the future. Like when I was looking for a job, I think I connected and talked with like at least 30 or 40 people, and I'm still following up with them. And who knows if I ever work with them again. And I think Elia had given me this statistic before. If you just fill out an online application without including any referrals or anything like that, then you have about a 1% chance of getting that job. Versus if you talk to someone, finding that connection, you have a 40% chance of working for that company or job in the future, which is like huge. So networking is the way to go. And it helps you also, like for a young engineer like myself, it helps me get a better knowledge of what I might want to do in the future and what kind of company and culture that I'm looking for. And it also helps with my communication skills a lot. So I think that's what I would say on that slide. If we could go to the next slide, that'd be great.
Yeah, and thank you, Michael. And I think that this is all really good advice, especially for students who are about to graduate or for those young graduates or recent grads. I think this is really good content for people who are just starting out in their careers, especially.
Mm-hmm. So the next slide I have is to talk about going beyond online applications. Like I know we're talking about online applications in this webinar. Sometimes they can get lost in the database if you just simply fill one out with no referral or contact at the company. So I just wanted to share a quick story of back when I was looking for jobs. In November, I'd reached out to a guy through a company I was interested in on LinkedIn, and he connected with me, and then we had like a 30-minute phone conversation. There weren't any jobs available at the time, but our conversation went well, and I gave him my resume and we stayed in touch. Then I think about a month later, he actually emailed me and he said, hey, Macklin, we just are going to look at opening up a job and we think you'd be a really good candidate and we'd like to invite you in for an interview. I was like, oh, that's awesome. So one of the steps along the way was he said, oh, just go ahead and quickly fill out this online application for this particular job, and then we'll schedule the interview. So I clicked on the link, and it turns out I had already completed that online application about a couple of weeks ago. So then I'm like sitting there like, what the heck, like I just what's the point of this online application if it seems like it just got lost in their system? And so that just kind of is one thing to show that like if you just have an online application but you don't have any referral from someone or a connection, it can get lost, and you never know what's going to happen with it. So that's like one important thing I wanted to talk about there. Another is just have a contact at that company. So that way you can, when you do fill out online applications, you can include them as a referral. Most applications have spots for people can add a referral from the employee. And also when you're done with the application, I advise if you have that contact, just send them an email and say, hey, I just finished this application. And that way you can kind of get yourself higher on that list. Yeah, and I think that's super important. And like I talked about a little bit before, at the least amount with networking, you can get great career advice through conversations, which is what really benefited for me being a young engineer. You can get great career advice and figure out, oh, is this the kind of company I want to work for? If it's not the kind of company I want to work for. So I think like the important takeaways is networking and online applications are still good, but I think you have to, in this day and age with so many people applying to jobs, especially right now, you definitely have to go beyond just to filling out an application online. You have to get that reference, have to get those contacts. Yeah, so I think that's what I would say. And I think I'm not sure if I have another slide.
Thank you, Macklin. We actually have another question. Greg,
Okay.
can share your question?
Yeah, someone wrote in that they try to reach out to folks on LinkedIn and don't hear back. So 2 questions. Is that normal? Like, what would you say the normal success rate is? And then do you have tips on how to bridge that sort of cold intro for someone that you don't know personally?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I'd say I've definitely had people that I've reached out to them and requested a connection with them, and they've never responded. And I've also had people in the case where I would they would accept my request, and I would message them, and they never responded either. So I think it's sometimes kind of like a numbers game where some people just aren't going to respond. Maybe they saw it and they're too busy, or maybe they just don't use LinkedIn that much. Like a lot of people said they only use LinkedIn monthly. And who knows, they might not have the iPhone app. Like I was on it every day, looking on my iPhone app, making sure all my messages were up to date. I was like a shark on there, but people have regular jobs and sometimes people aren't always on there. So I'd say like keep at it. Don't worry if people, don't accept your requests. Just keep doing it and keep trying to get other people to connect with you. Like really you just need one solid connection per company you're interested in, and then I think you're set. So I'd say as far as once you're like the tips for looking for someone, like I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd say in order to get people to connect with you better, you can always I think LinkedIn Premium has a feature where you can message people when you reach out for that connection request. That way you can give it a little bit of an introduction, so there's they see it's not just a stranger. Another thing is make sure with people, try to find someone who's kind of similar background to you. Like I'm a chemical engineer, so I looked for people who were chemical engineers or environmental engineers. I wasn't trying to connect with people who were computer science or something like that. So if you look for people that were like, OSU graduate or alum, same major as you, similar background, I think people oftentimes, at least for me, I feel like will be more willing to connect with people that they've never met before. And then the last thing I'd say,
Macklin, thank you so much. That's all really good advice. We're gonna keep on going just for the sake of time, but that was
sorry.
Fantastic advice, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of that. And next, we're gonna do a quick poll question, another one. This one is, how long do typical job searches take? Very curious to see what people think.
Okay. And as the responses come in, it looks like right now the clear winner is 3 to 6 months of active looking, and then it just drops off after that for 1 year or more, and then depends on the search, and 0% for 1 month or less, or 1 week or less.
Great, thank you. And I'll actually have I'll have Bruce and Marcia both share their thoughts on this question of how long job searches typically last. So Bruce, I'll have you share first, and then Marcia, I'll have you share second.
So I've heard a variety of responses to this, and I think it depends on how specialized or how specific the type of role that you're looking for is. I would say that typically from the recruiter side, I anticipate about a 2 to 3 month search to fill a specific role, and that's the amount of time it takes to kind of get a good talent pool in, work through the interview process, make selection, get an offer made. Occasionally, for a very specific role, it can take longer than that. But on our end, I think it's still about 2 to 3 months. If you are trying to do something that's highly specialized in an area where there's limited number of those types of roles, it could well take 6 to 12 months. And the way to shorten that is, again, I think some of the things we've mentioned before, it's networking to make sure that the people in that space who work with that or know that role know that you're available and what your skill sets are.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Marcia, what are your quick thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, from a recruiter's perspective, we have metrics that we also try to stick to. So we have what we call our time to fill metric. And so our job is obviously to not take long to fill a role. And so you can have roles, depending on which they are, could be filled within, I think the average is anywhere between 14 to 63 days is what some of the research shows. I would say typically for a majority of the roles, it's more within the 60 to 90-day range. A lot of production roles are going to be a little quicker turnaround, just because the interview process is probably not as extensive. But it really does depend on what type of a role you're trying to fill.
Thank you so much. And then next, we're going to have Charisse quickly tell us about how to decide your criteria for job searching.
Thanks, Yulia. Yulia, can you show the slides again? I see the quick poll. But I'm going to start talking. So I wanted to share really quickly, my mom shared with me when I was much younger, don't quit one job before you have a new job. So that was kind of what I grew up with and kind of the way I've always approached my career. So with me, I had advice from a mentor several years ago who told me, I work in higher education and to kind of plan out for a year and a half. So if you want something 18 months from now, you should be planning out for that now. So for me, when I think about this question that people just responded to, for me, it's definitely a lot longer of a process on the professional side. Yulia, I still don't see the slides. But the things that
I'm working. I'm sorry, I'm having technical issues with the slides.
Okay. But the things that I was going to talk about is kind of deciding what is the criteria for what you're hoping to do. So I'm in my 30s and I have several friends and colleagues in the same kind of boat. And so there's personal and professional values you start to ask yourself, like, do you have friends, family, your network around you? Are you willing to start new? I had a colleague who worked down south of Corvallis a little bit who told me that with where she was within her life, it was something where she would not actually apply for a job across the country unless she knew at least one person within that community. And so that's something to think about. Like, are you willing, it's not like I was a Peace Corps volunteer. It's not like going to a new country starting fresh with nothing. Do you have that network there yet, or are you wanting to start from scratch? I think another thing is the location or region. So I'm originally from the state of Oregon, and I only moved here to Wisconsin about a year ago. And for me, it was very much of like, do I have the hobbies I have here? Can I live in Wisconsin? I think I've gotten that question a bunch of times about the weather. But really thinking about where you want to live, if the culture suits your professional and your personal needs is definitely something that I think is important to focus on and think about. I think also thinking about the focus of your role. Before I moved this direction, it was important for me to think about, I asked myself lots of questions. So I work within international education, and it's a very specific niche. And so I think, does your education or experience actually lend itself to apply for something outside of that? I think right now with what we're experiencing because of the global pandemic, a lot of people are kind of facing that point in their career where they're asking, is this, like, what is important to me? Where do I want to be? And do I have the experience that would allow me to apply for something that's a little broader? You can't see the second slide, but I'll go to the second part because I think it's applicable. Other people have talked about this, but expanding your network and thinking about who you're talking to is really important. I for one have gotten very involved with professional organizations. I've shared that my field has been very niche. International education is a very small pocket of people. You know people across the nation after a while. Getting involved with professional organizations, and I think getting more and more involved in that is really important. And I think the next step, moving outside of, I would be on the second slide now. Getting outside of that, like if I wanted to look beyond my specific niche area, I think there's a lot of ways that I could start to grow and expand that network as well. I think meeting with other professionals is really important. I did put, Macklin talked quite a bit about making new connections on LinkedIn. I think fostering old connections is pretty important as well. Before even applying for jobs outside of the state of Oregon, I was connecting to a lot of mentors and people I'd met at different workshops or at different events I'd gone to, networking events, and I connected to them for some of their advice. So finding out, like, at what point did they decide that they were going to stay in Oregon rather than moving to the East Coast to expand their career? I was at a point where I was actually looking for a promotion, which wasn't possible where I was actually working beforehand. Yeah, and then I think making new connections is always a thing. Is always important. LinkedIn is a great source to do that, and I think sometimes the connections turn out into something. I'm very active on posting articles based on what I do, and I think for me at least, doing that has actually helped me find more connections than just adding people. I think being active on there and sharing kind of what Marcia was talking about your brand, the kind of articles or the kind of things you're connecting to on LinkedIn is just as important as I think those actually people that you connect, like click add. So anyway, sorry, I tried to go quickly because we're way behind schedule. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharice. And can you see my slide okay now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sharice, for being flexible. This is a new system for us because in the past we've done them in person with Greg and I sitting next to each other. Now we're doing them remotely. So thank you everyone for your patience as we work through the technical issues. And we're gonna go ahead and have Bruce share next, and he's gonna be sharing a recruiter's perspective on job searching.
It helps for me to unmute. We talked about a little bit earlier about resumes and trying to stand out, and just keep in mind that depending on the role or the organization, a recruiter can see up to 100 resumes in a day. And as much as you may think that the online system or AI process has taken control, I believe the vast majority of companies still rely on a human eye to review and assess information. And so what is occurring is they're opening these files and they're looking, and it might only be 3 to 5 seconds that they're actually looking at a resume, and they've got to find the information that they care about. So a couple of things that I would note is I would always put your education at the top of your resume. It's a pain when the education's all the way at the bottom. You got to scroll to the bottom to look for it, come back around, see what's in the profile. I prefer resumes that are listed in a chronological order because it shows me progression of responsibility. I know there's lots of advice out there of different ways, and if you talk to 100 recruiters, you'll probably get 100 different opinions of what the right way is. So one aspect that I think is important is your resume should be a reflection of who you are. And if it resonates with you, and if it's set up in a way that makes sense to you, then there's a good chance that it'll resonate with the right person and company and role that you're a fit for. Certainly you want to make sure that it's done professionally. I get the question all the time in CVs, it's customary to have a picture. In a resume, it's not. What's the right thing? Again, it goes back to you. If somebody goes on LinkedIn or any of social media, they're going to find pictures of you anyway. So if you do it, make it a professional picture. Make sure it enhances your resume. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't do it. It is going to be probably for the next 18 months a little bit of a seller's market, meaning the people who have the roles are going to be able to pick and choose a little bit. There will be exceptions to that where there's going to be high demand, high need in certain locations. But I have had an influx of people for roles that I don't even have posted. And so I know that you know, you're going to have to compete. You're going to have to try to stand out. The networking is going to be even more important. You can't rely on an online process to get you to the top of the pile.
Thank you, Bruce. And we
Advance
do
it.
have some questions on resumes. Greg, what are those questions?
Yes, to Bruce, primarily on sort of the nuts and bolts. So the first question is there a desired length? Is it 1 page or 2 pages? And the second question is about letters of recommendation and if they're worth asking for, and then how do you incorporate those into a resume?
Okay. So the first one, I would say, if you're coming right out of school and you don't have, you know, a number of years of experience, you should be able to get your resume to 1 page. You know, maybe 2 if you've done research or something where you need to cite things, but for the most part, you should be able to keep it to 1 to 2. If you've been out in the workforce for more than 10 years, 2 pages is completely appropriate, maybe even 3rd. What I would typically say is if you can keep your resume to 2 pages, and then if you need to have a list of projects or you need to have an addendum that highlights certain work that you've done, that's completely appropriate. As to the letter of recommendations, it is going to be dependent on the type of role that you're going for. There are certain roles where they still value that. I would say many don't. So I guess as a rule of thumb, I would say don't go asking for them unless you're asked to provide them. What you may want to do for people who would be a reference for you or who might write a letter of reference, you may want to just update them and say, hey, I'm looking for a new position, or you know, in the next 6 months, I want to be looking for a new position, and I may ask you to be a reference or write a letter of recommendation, just so they have that kind of preface. And then when you actually have the need, make sure that you go back and say, hey, I got the interview with Acme Company. They're going to be calling you this week, and please, be prepared to accept that call, and make sure that your references are updated and understand kind of who you are and what you're looking for, so that they can provide a good reference.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was great advice. And next, Bruce is going to share with us some basics of job searching from his perspective.
Okay, so you've heard the word LinkedIn a number of times. It sounds like most people have accounts, whether they've been active or not. It is a very, very powerful tool, both for the recruiter and for the person looking for a role. There's an area that I don't think has been mentioned, but in LinkedIn, you can actually go in and notify recruiters what you're looking for. Disclaimer, it's supposed to be blind to the company that you're working for, but if a recruiter is working for a company and they don't have that company's email address, they will be able to see it. So if you're currently working for someplace and they don't know that you're searching, you can use this, but with a grain of salt, it may get back to somebody. If you are currently actively searching, there's no reason you wouldn't want to do this. And you can identify roles, regions, what exactly you're looking for in words. If for instance, you're in an accounting phase and you only want to be doing a certain type of accounting, then you can lay that out, and then the recruiters can review that, and the ones that are looking for what you want are going to contact you, and the ones that are looking for something else won't bother you. And then, we've talked about networking. I won't go into that, but using that network, I would say somebody asked a question earlier about people not responding. I would guess that it's probably about a 10 to 20% return rate on LinkedIn, as far as people getting back to you in a timely fashion. And some of that is because people aren't on LinkedIn all the time. So don't be offended if you have to send out 8 or 9 messages and only get 1 or 2 solid replies. That's probably typical. If you do a really good job of writing an intro message that connects with them, I think you can easily get that up to, 40 or 50%. My LinkedIn messages, I think the last number I thought was 47% response, which is like off the charts. So you're likely not going to get that level of response, but you can if you craft a good message. And the slide says that your job is to meet people, but it's not only to meet people, but to in a polite way introduce what you're looking for, so that they know about you and what you're interested in. Referrals are still going to be very powerful. So at my company, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I know we have a sales position and I think this person would be great, or I know we have a customer service person, you should talk to this person, that person's going to go to the top of the list. Now, they still have to go through the same process and they still have to make it through to the other end, but they're at least going to get a running start. I can think of a couple of roles. One, we hired the person that was recommended. Another couple of roles we didn't, but that was because we identified that what they were looking for wasn't really what we needed, and that's okay. So getting people not only to kind of be advocates for you in the marketplace, as well as actively reaching out to those who might be an influencer in this space. So a strategy around that. If you're looking for a role, say you see a couple of roles you really like with, I don't know, I'm going to pick on Garmin, they're in Salem. You don't maybe know anybody, in the direct chain of command for that role, but you do have a loose connection to somebody who works at Garmin in a different department. Reach out to them. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them what you're interested in. Ask for an introduction. And most people, unless you've done something to really offend them, are going to be willing to make that introduction. And again, even a soft, hey, I had this person reach out to me, why didn't you talk to them, is still going to elevate somebody beyond just an application.
That's great, Bruce. And next, next we're going to talk about some more job searching tips. And I think that thinking as a recruiter is going to really help you define and create a stronger job.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is really attractive to a candidate, to me about a candidate, is when they have a strong sense of what they want. If I ask a candidate what they want to do and they say, I don't know, I'm just kind of pretty open to a job, I'll do whatever, that doesn't impress me. I mean, it might make them flexible, and if I have a bunch of entry-level roles, then maybe that means they would be able to bounce between departments, and that might be a good thing. But it's a lot more solid when somebody can articulate exactly what they fit, what fits them, what motivates them, why they get up in the morning. That's such a more strong answer. And I think it's a great way not only to identify job opportunities and evaluate job opportunities, if you have created a list of criteria of what looks good for you, what fits you. And think about not only the role, but the type of company, the geography, just the different things that if I'm in this type of an environment, I'm successful. Now, if you're a recent grad and you haven't had the experience to do that yet, totally fine to say, hey, yes, I'm looking for experience. I don't yet know everything that I would like to do. I know that I've enjoyed these projects or these processes in the past. Totally fine. But speaking to somebody who's been in the market for at least 10 years, you should have a pretty good idea of what fits you, and to be able to go after those types of roles. And then think about also kind of what are some of the things you've accomplished. I know this was covered a little bit earlier in updating your resume, but think about the things that have made you unique. What was the project that you were put on that nobody else in the company knew how to run that project, but you were taught how to do it? Those kinds of things happen in other companies too, and having that expertise could be valuable.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think we have one more question. Greg, what's our next question?
Yes, so I like this question. So it's regarding references, should they be from your most recent position? Should you actively be looking for new references, or should you refrain from using old references from 10 years ago? So any thoughts, recommendations on new versus old references?
Yeah, Bruce, what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll move to the summary after that.
So the difficulty with like the most recent role may be that either you may not have left on the best of terms, or the situation, those people who may have been laid off as well with 20 or 30% reduction, and now it's harder to get to them. So I would say the closer that a reference is, the better it typically is. Meaning a reference that's been engaged with you in the last 2 to 5 years is more valuable than a reference that talked to you 15 years ago. That doesn't mean that the reference 15 years ago might not be the right one to give for this role if the role you had 15 years ago equates to the role that you're anticipating at this new company. So you have to kind of take a little bit by a grain of salt, but I would say if you stick to references of people you've worked with in the last, say, 18 months to 5 years, that's probably a fairly safe range.
Thank you, Bruce. That was great. I really appreciate that advice. So I'll quickly take us through the summary. I think there were some really good nuggets in there about personal branding and how important it is, and connecting with others, and how crucial it is to the job search. Being open to opportunities, thinking from that recruiter's perspective. I think we heard from some really wonderful panelists about the different ways in which we can think about our job search. And then Macklin is available to speak with you if you reach out to him on LinkedIn. So here's his LinkedIn profile. And Marcia is also available to share with you, and you can find her on LinkedIn as well. And just a reminder that we do have alumni career services, and I'm here to help you through your job search. So do definitely reach out to me if you need assistance or looking for a position. Sounds like the majority of you are in the job searching process, and definitely happy to be a resource for you. Oops. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties with my computer here. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Greg for the wrap up. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for the panelists, for Bruce, for Marcia, for Macklin, for Charisse. You're all amazing. And Greg's going to give our last final wrap up.
Thank you so much, Julia, Marcia, Bruce, Charisse, and Macklin. That was great. And I did want to give just a little bit of information. I talked about professional and continuing education here at OSU. And the reason we like to partner with the Alumni Association and hear from our alumni is because we're often able to connect with the very widespread OSU network throughout not only the state of Oregon, but the US and beyond. And we can offer educational opportunities for personal enrichment and professional development. Each program we offer is designed for working professionals with convenient online classes and year-round start dates. We also offer customizable team training. So again, I want to thank Yulia, Marcia, Bruce, Charisse, and Macklin. We really appreciate having you here. And this was great. You delivered a ton of great content. And with that, I will wrap it up. And thank you so much for attending, and we will see you at the next webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone.